1980. So probably before most of you were born, I was practicing in the field of biomechanics. I should say that Dr. Watt was one of the very best students that I have ever had. And I am so pleased that he and I have stayed in contact over many years. One of the highlights of my career is to have served as the director of Olympic research during the 1996 Olympic Games in Atlanta. That opportunity afforded me many chances to go to Olympic Games, both summer and winter games. And at most of the games that I attended, there were research projects going on in the area of sports science, and particularly in biomechanics. I've also had the opportunity to work rather extensively in the Paralympic movement, have been a part of research projects in multiple games, and have attended even many more games than that. So what's the difference between data collection in a games environment versus a laboratory environment? That's basically what we're talking about. Obviously, the Olympic and Paralympic Games offers the opportunity to study athletes that are the very best in their respective sport. They are at the top of their performance because of their training, and you would expect that if you can capture the data of their motions, that you would get the ideal insight into what it takes to be an Olympic or a Paralympic performer. But I'm sure that we can all recognize the challenge of collecting data during an actual athletic event. And there are no bigger athletic events than the Olympic and Paralympic Games. So why is this topic important, the games versus the laboratory? Well, we always want to ensure that we have the most accurate information possible. And to be able to capture data during a games gives us data that presumably demonstrates the very best that an athlete has to offer. When that same athlete is performing their skills in a laboratory setting, we can't say with absolute certainty that their performance in the lab will be the same as that on the field, or on the track, or in a pool, or wherever it is that that athlete might perform. In the lab, we can take much time to prepare, place our cameras, calibrate our frames, our field, put electrodes on, put markers on, make sure the equipment is working just perfectly, and being able to completely and totally control the environment in which we are collecting data. In a lab, there aren't 50,000 fans in attendance that are making loud noises. There aren't broadcast television cameras trying to get into the same space that you have your cameras in. Those are some of the challenges when you're doing data collection during an actual competition. During an Olympic and Paralympic Games, because they're so expensive to run, the television broadcasters have the highest priority on where they place their cameras for the purposes of television. And oftentimes where they want their cameras is where we, the biomechanists, also want our cameras. The other challenge in an athletic competition is that we don't have access oftentimes to the field during the competition. We have to access the field of play before or after the competitions have occurred. And given that, we also then don't have access to the athletes. One of the stringent requirements that we had for some of our research during the Olympic and Paralympic Games was that we could not interface or communicate directly with the athletes during their competition. So we were completely separated from where the athletes were in preparing for and competing in their athletic competition. So some of the challenges that one faces when leaving the lab and going on to the field are where to place your cameras, understanding that the television broadcasters are going to have the highest priority. Calibrating your cameras. During the Atlanta Olympic Games, we had a team that was analyzing baseball pitching. So they had to put their calibration frame on the pitching mound. And while they were putting their calibration frame on the pitching mound, the groundskeepers turned on the sprinkler system. So there was water flying everywhere around their calibration frame while they were trying to calibrate their cameras. And then, of course, as I just mentioned, access to the field of play and the athletes. This setting here on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen is a setup for analyzing a swimming competition. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But during the 96 games and during the 2000 games in Sydney, Australia, every swimming event was recorded in real time and data gathered so that by the evening, the swimmers would have information about their competition and could make adjustments before their next competition. It was really quite wondrous to watch such an event take place. So here are some examples of calibrating for the in a competition. This is not actually during an Olympic Games, with the exception of this image here. These are in another level of performance, but you can see that nobody is in the stands. And so the researchers have the opportunity before the games or before the competition to calibrate their video. So as I mentioned, broadcast cameras have priority. Because the games are being televised all over the world, the cameras are plentiful, many cameras in many places, and they have the very best spots in order to capture the performance. And these are the very same locations that we would like to have our cameras. The other thing I should note are all the people in the stands, people that can get in the way. They can stand in front of your cameras. They can bump your cameras. They can cause vibrations to occur, things that can adversely affect the data capture. And then here's a ski jump. This is in Lillehammer, or I'm sorry, in Nagano. Where do you put your cameras when you have such an open area in order to capture the actual jump? Well, we did it. We put our cameras on this platform here, along with the broadcast cameras, and we also put a force platform at the end of the jump run. And here, of course, is a laboratory. This is the laboratory here at Georgia State University, where Watt and I spent many, many hours back in the 90s and early 2000s. This was the home laboratory for the 96 Olympic Games. But here are some other examples of laboratory settings. They look very different, of course, from the field of play that you would have in an Olympic or a Paralympic Games. And here are athletes that are having their movements captured with reflective markers placed on their bodies for ease of capture. One of the major concerns with doing a competition-related biomechanics analysis today is because we can't put reflective markers on the athletes, we have no means of digitizing their performance. Back in the old days, we had to hand digitize performance. That was just how we did even laboratory-based research. And when you're only capturing video, as would be required during an Olympic or Paralympic Games, there's not a reflective marker. There's not a computerized system that's going to automatically identify the critical body landmarks. And so it's difficult today to find software that allows you to do video analysis from a videotape or a video recording of the performance. We're just accustomed to the computer and the camera doing all of that for us. So today, biomechanics is much more automated in terms of data collection than it was back when I was first coming through in the 80s, 90s, and into the early 2000s. So certainly we're able to capture much more data and much better data with these modern systems than from the past. But because of what we've become accustomed to and what's available to us software-wise, it's difficult to now go back and do it the same way we did 15 or 20 years ago. So let me give you just a general history of the Olympic and Paralympic Games and sports science. The International Olympic Committee created the Medical Commission primarily to oversee the health of athletes and to address the issue of doping. So we're very familiar with the IOC's Medical Commission because they are the individuals that keep track of the use of drugs during competitions that give athletes an advantage. Because the Medical Commission enforced doping, it was viewed by many as having a very negative role. And so the Medical Commission decided that they needed to do something that would cast a more positive light on the work that they did. So just before the 1984 Los Angeles Summer Olympic Games, the Medical Commission created the Subcommission on Biomechanics and Physiology of Sport. And it was the purpose of this subcommission to do the sports science related analysis that I'll be speaking about today. In 1984 Barcelona Summer Olympic Games, the Barcelona committee hosted the first groups of international sports scientists after the Los Angeles Games, the 1984, the Los Angeles Summer Olympic Games, I should say Los Angeles and not Barcelona, hosted the first groups of international sports scientists to collect games during an actual Olympic competition. So in Los Angeles, they did 5 projects, mostly track and field and gymnastics related, as well as weightlifting. Then in 1994, the first Winter Olympic Games had research projects from that subcommission. That was the Lillehammer Winter Games. In 1996, the Atlanta Summer Olympic Games was hosted and at Georgia State University, where Watt and I were located, we hosted the subcommission for biomechanics and physiology of sport. We did the largest contingent of we hosted the largest contingent of international sports scientists in the history of any single sporting event. We had more than 100 sports scientists who were conducting 23 research projects in 14 different Olympic sports. In addition, we also had a biomechanics high performance coaches center that was located within the Olympic Village, and it allowed coaches and athletes to come and review the performances from every day in order to make improvements in performance for the next round of competition. This was a very, very challenging event. We planned for the data collection for more than a year. So I would meet very regularly with the Olympic broadcast group to determine where we would put our cameras and where they would put their cameras. So there was a lot of planning that had to take place in order to overcome all of the challenges and the security that goes around an Olympic competition. In 1998, in the Nagano Winter Olympic Games, they hosted a number of projects, including putting a force plate in the takeoff point for the ski jump. And then in 2000, the Sydney Summer Olympic Games was the last games for which a formal program of research was supported by the IOC. So in the 2000 games, the IOC subcommission performed its last duties in collecting data during an actual Olympic competition. After Sydney, the subcommission was disbanded, and they changed their focus from competition-related biomechanical or sports science analysis to more health, wellness, and injury assessment. So the IOC Medical Commission still supports research, but it supports research that's focused primarily on health and on injury, as opposed to identifying the parameters that make for a good competition or make for a good sport performance. They are relying upon the sport governing bodies to focus upon high performance and sport improvement. In 1996, the first Paralympic Games research was also performed. There was no formal application process for collecting data during the Summer Olympic Games, but because Georgia State University also was in charge of the high performance during the Paralympic Games, we had a few researchers that were doing data collection during those games. Particularly, we were looking at things like swimming and sprinting with visual impairment. Following the Atlanta Games, the International Paralympic Committee began to formalize the scientific aspects of both their classification system and performance by athletes with various physical disabilities. So the International Paralympic Committee basically was following the lead of the IOC Medical Commission and creating their own scientific committee. So the IPC continues with its scientific committee until today, and they continue to have in-games sports science projects for each of their summer and winter games. So the IPC and the IOC are still doing research, but they're doing research a little bit differently than back at the very beginning of their work. Some notable projects that I should mention that have occurred over time, and there have been many. There's no way that I have enough time today to talk about all the various research that has been done. But of particular note are the real-time swimming analyses done of all swimming events at the 1996 and the 2000 games. As I mentioned earlier, in those two Olympic Games, and this also happened in the Paralympic Games as well in 96 and 2000, every swimming competition, every swimmer had their swimming performance analyzed, stroke rate, stroke length, various timing parameters, things of that nature for every single time they swam. And that day, those data were available within about 4 hours after the competition, so that the coach and the athlete had the opportunity to assess the performance and make changes before the next round of competition. It was an unbelievable thing to take in because of the number of individuals that were working simultaneously as the competition was occurring in order to collect that data. The books of information that they collected were very, very thick. At the end of the Atlanta Games, I had 2 large notebooks that were about this thick with data from each of the events that were captured and all the athletes that were captured. Force plate analysis and video analysis was also done of diving at the 96 Games. A force platform was embedded on the 10-meter platform in the diving venue during the 96 Games. And video was also captured at the same time so that very detailed 3D analyses could be done of the diving competition. We did the very same sort of analysis at the Nagano Winter Olympic Games for the ski jumping. And then you may or may not remember, this has been now, 12 or 14 years ago, the International Track and Field Governing Body, the IAAF, rejected Oscar Pistorius's. Oscar Pistorius was a double amputee sprinter from South Africa. They rejected Oscar Pistorius's bid to compete in the 2008 Beijing Summer Olympic Games, but eventually were overruled by the Court of Arbitration in Sport, allowing the first disabled athlete to compete in an able-bodied Olympic Games. Pistorius was rejected from the Games, first of all, just simply based on the fact that he was wearing prostheses. And when there was controversy about that ruling, the IAAF had a biomechanics research project done on Pistorius in Germany. And based on the data that were collected during that data analysis, they continued to reject him from competing, saying that his prostheses gave him an advantage over the able-bodied sprinters. And he sued the IAAF, and the Court of Arbitration in Sport in Switzerland overruled the IAAF and allowed him to actually compete during the Olympic Games. So this was quite a controversy. Isn't it amazing to think that someone without lower legs, someone who has to run with 2 prostheses, would be determined by the track and field governing body to have an advantage over the very best sprinters in the world, sprinters of the caliber of Usain Bolt, for example. But we've now seen, since Pistorius was able to compete in the Olympic Games, several other Paralympic athletes also compete during the Games. We had the opportunity in the 1996 Olympic Games to analyze, as I mentioned, 14 different sports with 23 different research projects. One of the sports that we were analyzing was women's gymnastics. And I'm sure you don't remember this because it was probably before you were born, but the American gymnast Carrie Strug injured herself on the first vault during the team competition. She very severely injured her ankle. And in order for the US to win the team competition gold medal, she had to do her second vault. So even though she had suffered a very severe injury, she managed to land very successfully her second vault that carried the women's team to a gold medal. So I was able to do a very detailed analysis of her vault that allowed the American women to win the gold medal. And that was published in the local newspaper and explained how biomechanics, from a biomechanical perspective, how it was that she was successful in performing her vault. And this is her coach carrying her to get her gold medal. And then, of course, one of the more frequent projects analyzed during Olympic Games are track and field events, sprinting, So arguably, Oscar Pistorius was the fastest man from a Paralympic perspective, while Usain Bolt was the fastest man and continues to be the fastest human ever in running 100 and 200 meters, holding the world record in each of those events. Biomechanics research has shown that in order to run fast, one must have a very high stride rate, meaning how fast you can turn your legs over, how quickly you can rotate your legs, and a very long stride, the distance between your toe off and your foot contact. And because Usain Bolt is very tall, he has a long stride length, but he also is a very powerful individual and has a very high stride frequency. So because of the combination of those factors, he's able to run faster than any other human being in history. And our biomechanics research shows this to all be true. Here are some examples of various other athletes. These are Paralympic athletes: wheelchair basketball, wheelchair track and field, swimming, wheelchair tennis. There are equivalents in Paralympic sport for virtually every Olympic sport. I have sent my PowerPoint presentation to Dr. Watt, and he can send that out to you. But here are some links that you might find interesting to follow that are on the Olympic website or on the Paralympic website, or are in a journal that will give you some insight into the earliest days of how the Olympics were studying athletic performance. What our research over these many years has shown is that it certainly was possible during an Olympic or a Paralympic Games to capture worthwhile data and to give feedback to athletes and to inform the literature of what it is that athletes do that makes them so successful. But as I mentioned early on, the challenge of actually collecting data during a competition, the magnitude of an Olympic or Paralympic Games, makes it more trouble than it truly is worth. So I can't say that I argue with the IOC having discontinued their in-games data projects, data collection projects, because it was a very expensive endeavor and it did create significant challenges for the competition as well as for the research groups. There were so many variables that had to be controlled that it made for some very difficult times. I can say with absolute certainty that any day that I showed up at an Olympic venue when we were collecting data, I had no idea what I was going to find. Very often times where we would place our cameras, the broadcasters would decide for that day that that's where they were going to put their cameras, and we would then have to move. And when we had to move our cameras, excuse me, then we would have to recalibrate our field of play. And that created some real challenges for us. So I think for those reasons, that much of what we were able to do back during the Atlanta Games has been discontinued. And so we're very now reliant upon laboratory-based research or collecting data during games that are not of the same caliber as the Olympic and Paralympic Games. So perhaps at World Championships or at regional championships or at national championships, the same sorts of data can be collected without nearly the same level of challenge and security that has to go into place. So my last point, and this is probably given where we are today in the world, the challenge of security. Clearly, after the bombing that occurred during the 1996 Atlanta Games, even though we were incredibly careful about screening individuals, the Olympic movement's focus on security became ever more heightened. Before we could get any cameras or any equipment into any venue, every single item we took in had to be inspected. And so if we tried to bring batteries into a venue or cameras into a venue before the competitions began, we would most likely be turned away because of the fear that we might have some sort of explosive device in our equipment. And so because of those sorts of challenges, the IOC determined also that it just wasn't worth continuing to try to do this kind of these kinds of projects. So I don't fault the IOC for changing their support of sports science research, but I am glad that we're able to do the same kind of research in our laboratories. And I know Dr. Watt is preparing students to do that very same sort of data collection, because I frequently see incredible photos and videos of some of the work that's taking place at Mahidol. So I will stop talking now and answer.